Blog Talk Radio.
Tonight on Salamone, I'm trying out podcasting. My first ever guest is the Reverend Quincy Worthington. We'll talk about stuff, try and process this last week. I don't know if it'll be any good, but it'll be a good conversation. I hope. And I hope you'll join us. Well, welcome to my first ever attempt at podcasting. Quincy, are you there?
I am here. Are you there?
Excellent. Technology works. That's fantastic. Folks, I'm Michael Salamone. Quincy Worthington is my guest today. We're lifelong friends. He's a Presbyterian minister, a devoted husband and father, a pipe aficionado, a tattoo enthusiast, all-around great guy, and was nice enough to be my guinea pig for trying out this new type of medium for me. So we're going to have a conversation tonight about stuff that's going on in the world and maybe try and make some sense of it. I don't know if that's possible, but Quincy, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, anytime, man. Anytime. It's worth pointing out that we met because you were my Sunday school teacher.
It's true. I like to take a little credit for the fact that you went into a life of ministry for no reason, really, except for my own narcissism that, well, he's a minister, and I met him teaching in Sunday school. But
yeah, I don't think anybody saw that coming, really.
People were shocked that I was teaching children, let alone about God. And you, of all the students, know that nobody saw that coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason I thought that Quincy, you, sir, would be the ideal first person to have a conversation with and record it is because of my respect for you as a friend, a person, a leader, but also that you're one of the most caring people I've ever met, and with all the news that's been coming out, whether it's the death of beloved celebrities like Lauren Bacall and Robin Williams, or Don Pardo last night, or Ferguson, or today, just probably the breaking news closest to us speaking is that journalist James Wright Foley was apparently executed by the Islamic State of Iraq, or ISIS, as everybody's calling it. And I thought, well, I need to personally chat with somebody who kind of has a good pulse of the world and what people are feeling and who we are as humanity, and that's why I called upon you, good sir. We haven't talked in a bit, so I don't know what you've been following, but I thought maybe this James Wright Foley thing is a good place to start because it feels like an attack on journalists is center to a lot of the things we're seeing in the news lately. Ferguson, Israel, and here in Iraq. Did you get a chance to see any of that stuff today?
Today I haven't had too much of a chance to pay attention to the news. I did kind of briefly see articles about ISIS and what was going on with Foley, and then briefly this morning as I was drinking my morning cup of coffee, I checked to see what was going on in Ferguson, partly because, that's relatively close to where I live now. It's about 4 hours away, but, we're in the same time zone, and, some of my members of my congregation come from that area and have connections there. So that, and I think it's, I think it's really desperately important for anybody in America to be paying attention to what's going on there. Now, granted, yesterday I was a little bit more tuned in with the news and saw Dr. Badden's report in his interview. So I feel like I've got a better handle on the Ferguson situation than maybe the ISIS situation. But
I'll just cap off
essentially
that topic then by saying they posted pictures that they apparently beheaded him as a message to why the U.S. should be staying out of Iraq. But I think that
is that really a compelling argument? I mean,
well, what is in all of these cases? I mean, back to Ferguson. I mean, I made the joke on Twitter that maybe I'm a simpleton, but to me it seems simple. Arrest the cop, temper's cool. The cop gets a trial. That's something Mike Brown will never have. And we'll figure out the truth through the laws we have in place. Whereas, example of an executed journalist, but in Ferguson they're locking them up. They're gassing. I saw live feeds last night of them threatening journalists, the cops and the National Guard.
Yeah, I mean, that's the scary thing about Ferguson, right, is when you hear about them, the police surrounding McDonald's where 2 reporters are in and arresting the reporters, and, what was it, they threw tear gas right near the Al Jazeera reporters, and I mean, granted, I'm sure there are probably 2 sides to that. One could argue that they didn't know that they were Al Jazeera reporters or whatever, but, to me what scares me about the whole situation in Ferguson is the lack of transparency and openness about it. And granted, I know you aren't supposed to get too much of that with a police investigation, but yeah, to me it seems like, I guess there are 2 concerns I have about it, and they all center around justice. And what worries me about both sides is that justice seems to be awfully one-sided. And I think what people are looking for is justice, however that plays out.
That's part of one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is, I mean, I'm older than you, and I'm too young to have lived through the civil rights campaign, but so much of this reminds me of my studies of it, and I know you are a student of Dr. King and the things that people endured through their protests, which were peaceful protests, but labeled as terrorists, labeled as criminals. And I feel like, ironically, the media, mainstream media, is painting a whole different picture than what I'm seeing on Twitter and by watching all the news streams and the live feeds that people are just doing on their cell phone. I was watching one earlier for a good hour that this guy, he lived 5 hours away from Ferguson. He had the equipment. He decided, I'm going there. And I was one of like 2,500 people watching him march peacefully and interviewing the demonstrators, all of which are frustrated, angry, tired. They've been out there for 9 days. But talking about justice and peace and the themes that I've read from history, and here we are doomed to repeat it again, as a religious man, as a religious leader, and a student of Dr. King and the civil rights days, how are you, or how do you plan to, or what is the dialogue that you'll have, well, not just with your parishioners, but your kids? I mean, how are you describing this, or will you describe this, or tell the importance of it to people?
Yeah, it's funny. My sermon this past Sunday, we talked about Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, which people are kind of like, he's going to talk about creation. But really what I was focused on was, God spoke order into chaos. When we look at the Hebrew text, it talks about the earth was tohu vabohu, which, in Hebrew means basically chaos. And the translation we have in English of it being kind of nullness and void, makes it sound like it's a blank piece of paper. But really in the Hebrew language, it describes creation at its inception as just pure chaos. And then God speaks, be light, and the chaos basically stops at that point, And so what we talked about, or what I tried to talk about with my congregation, mainly was just out of frustration from seeing the comments on Facebook that were hateful and hurtful and horrible, really, surrounding both Robin Williams' death and then the situation in Ferguson, was that our words have the power to create. If we're made in God's image, and God has given us, essentially the power to name things in creation, which is giving things a sense of identity. Words become very important and very powerful, and how we speak about things and dictates the reality we see. And so it becomes very important as a Christian how we look at things and how we speak about things and how we speak about and to people. And I guess what worries me from a religious leader standpoint is, back in the day, like in the civil rights movement and pre-civil rights movement, when people wanted a Christian perspective of things, they went to people like Paul Tillich and Reinhold Niebuhr and scholars, Christian scholars and theologians who were well educated and well versed. And today, the religious right is kind of, not to turn this into a slam against evangelicals of the religious right, but we're not hearing voices like that come out of Christianity. To tie it into the ISIS thing, everybody after 9/11 was screaming about, well, where are the moderate voices of Islam? And I wanted to say, where are the moderate voices of Christianity? Because that's not who the media focuses on now. They go to people who say insightful and horrible things. I mean, look at how much attention was paid to Rush Limbaugh and what he said about Robin Williams. And I was shocked anybody paid attention to what Rush Limbaugh said anymore. But, I think it's important to find the right voices that speak on the behalf of things. And that's something that we're lacking in this movement. What's that?
I was going to say, I feel that no matter your religious affiliation or even those who don't have one, we can all agree on the point that words matter. A good friend of mine, Paul LaPlaca, posted a video recently on YouTube where he and his son spoke to one bag of rice horribly and another bag of rice positively, and the one bag of rice spoken to with horrible words turns black and decrepit while the other is just fine and normal. But with that said, I mean, we just agree that words matter and that this is an important time for us to pay attention. And what you just mentioned strikes a chord with me about where are even moderate Christians speaking out other than people like yourself. It seems like in the media, even with this Mike Brown situation in Ferguson, we're seeing people demonize this kid. 18-year-old kid would have started college today. Well, he had pot in his system. Well, so did our last three presidents.
Right.
He sold those cigarettes. Well, I've seen the footage now thanks to, and this is a whole different topic of conversation, the good work of Anonymous, which is blowing my mind with their outreach and support of the Ferguson situation. But they have the footage of the kid paying for the cigarettes, so this is a null issue, but I keep seeing people who are supposed to be stewards of the right, and by association that means Christianity, demonizing this murdered child. And maybe I'm just old enough to consider 18 a child, but it still has teen in the name.
Right.
And,
well,
and what you said is true. Words matter. We have to be sympathetic and empathetic to the suffering of his family. Put all of it else aside. There is a family that should have been sending their kid to college today that instead are having to plan on how to put him in the ground.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, one of the biggest tenets of Christianity is redemption, and the idea that we're all redeemable and that none of us are, golly. I don't have to tell you, and I'm not going to tell anybody listening to this what my past was like, but if I were to be judged on what I deserve, holy cow. You know what I'm saying? And to me, people say, well, the footage matters and it's all about character here and blah, blah, blah. But, at the end of the day, it boils down to an unarmed kid shot over, 6 times, possibly more. And I don't understand. I mean, and granted, I'm trying to be sensitive to the police in this, and that I've never been a police officer. I've never been a soldier. I've never, I guess I've probably been put in danger similar to that before, unknowingly, but I don't know. I mean, to me, it's a sanctity of life argument, right? And the problem we get in a lot of times is people want to say only certain life is sacred and other life isn't. And to me, that becomes a very slippery slope. Right.
Ironic in itself, because when I listen to the protesters and the leaders, even the folks at Anonymous who today outed the governor's social security number and all his personal information, but none of them are calling for retribution as in a gun wound to this police officer, Darren Wilson. Everyone just wants him arrested. So
right.
You've got people supporting, they say they're supporting the police demonizing this dead child, but the folks out there in the streets for 9 days now just want him to experience due process, the right that the kid never got. It to me, has shown a great deal of humanity.
Right. And the problem is we don't know the internal workings of the police department, and they've been extremely closed off about it. I mean, I know that there's a Justice Department investigation going into it, but to me, I don't understand if a police officer shoots anybody, justified or not, right? And certainly there are just reasons for a police officer to have to use a firearm, right? I mean, there just are. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But it seems like even in cases where it seems clearly justified, there needs to be some type of due process, both for that officer's protection and for the protection of the public and the safety of the public. And, for these parents, I can't even imagine what they must be going through. And I mean, they deserve some answers and some satisfaction, some satisfaction about it. Not that necessarily anything's going to give them that. I mean, I don't know how you satisfy that, but at least to me, it seems like if it were my child, to have some type of answers as to why or how it happened. Not saying that if it comes out that it was this kid's fault, whatever his fault would be, but if it comes out that the police officer acted justly, I mean, at least in this case, just to be hanging there like this it's just, I can't even imagine.
I struggle with the fact that the police haven't interviewed any of the 3 or maybe 4 people that have claimed to be witnesses. Yet those people took to Twitter before Mike Brown's body laid there for 4 hours, before his body was even gone, these witnesses gave their accounts, which all match up. And my understanding is they didn't communicate between these periods of time. And there's a pretty nice thing about Twitter. Unlike Facebook, you can't edit your posts. The timestamps are there. So it's weird to me that people like Anonymous or Op Ferguson have to compile this data for the public. But you're right. Maybe that's not how police work. Maybe we don't see this. I've watched enough police procedurals, though, to know that there's a paper trail, and I feel like everything they're doing is to cover up a lack of paper trail. But that's personal paranoia, maybe. The good thing,
yeah, but I mean, it's certainly the police have not done anything to quell people's. It seems to me it would just be common sense or good knowledge to say, okay, this is what happened. I mean, just for the sake of, you want to calm down these protests and these riots. Don't enact curfews on it. Don't. I mean, part of the problem is people feel like you shot an innocent person, and so then you're going to essentially lock up innocent people in their house and tell them that they can't leave. I mean, just everybody across the board. I mean, that doesn't seem to me to be quelling people's fears and paranoias about it. It seems to escalate it. And what was it? I think it was Dr. Baden on when they were interviewing him after he did his independent autopsy, he said his experience in New York was every time that you're transparent about what has happened and give due process to the procedure, that quells a lot of the unrest and unhappiness that the community is experiencing. And you just don't see that.
Yeah.
I mean, instead you see them trying to silence everything at every last corner, which just feeds the suspicion and everything else.
And fuels the hostility. Now, a lot of the stuff I've seen of like, oh, they're throwing Molotov cocktails has actually been people throwing tear gas canisters back. But there's been some looting, nothing like even the race riots that St. Louis are famous for. But when you do see those riots on like the Ustreams and the live streams that people are doing from their phones, the protesters, heck, I saw pictures of Crips and Bloods standing together to stop looters from entering stores. Like the majority of people there are just asking for due process to be served. And to me, that gives me hope. Like, this is dark, dirty. It's the worst of America. It's the worst of American government for sure. But the people, my friend Jane contacted me last night about watching a lady hand out Freezy Pops to protesters who've been walking all night last night. And I love the video every morning of people out sweeping up the streets and these little old ladies, these little old Jewish ladies that one had survived the Holocaust and been protesting civil rights their whole life. And there's so much great humanity coming out of this dark story that I feel that that's the hope of the situation. And really what we need to encourage others to speak up about is, hey, I'm against this, but I'm for this. I'm against brutality, tyranny, not obeying our Constitution, but I am for humanity and justice. How do we encourage that kind of statement? I mean, we were talking about what the post on Facebook, so negative, and barely any recognition of what's going on here, which I think is probably the biggest American event of my lifetime. How do we persuade others to not be apathetic and to just speak up?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean that the scary part is that our culture is tending towards apathy, but at the same time we're seeing so much that's leading things towards a boiling point. When you see the disparity, and none of this is separate, I find it all interrelated. So you have the disparity between the wealthy and the middle class disappearing and the poor. I mean, I saw something the other day, I think it was in The Economist, that said the American dream is now fiscally unattainable for 80% of all Americans, meaning 80% of America is unable to live what would be considered the American dream, right? So you have that boiling, and then you have the situation in Washington where everything is broken down into polars and idealism and towing party lines, which is tied into campaign finance, and so you have a huge dissatisfaction with America in the political process, and rightfully so, because it really feels that nobody's speaking for the best interests of the people involved on either side of the party. And you have these absolutist attacks, which are teaching people this kind of polar rhetoric that you see, playing out on Facebook about the posts about these things, where we no longer can just civilly disagree with each other. It's not enough just to say, well, I disagree with you. I now have to believe that you're an evil person, that you are out to destroy America. In the church we see it as, well, you're a Bible-denying person who is trying to rip apart the church. You're trying to destroy the church, which is ridiculous. But we see the same rhetoric playing out in politics. And so you see huge divisions along that. And we're losing not just the moderate voice, but because of that, everything is boiling, that you worry, or I worry at least, that when I see things like what's going on in Ferguson, that this is going to be the beginning of, maybe not the end, but the pot's now boiled over. And it's, going to be going to be horrible. And I think what we're finding, I guess what I worry about in my role as a pastor is that we're coming to the point where doing the right thing is going to make you very unpopular.
It's so important that people realize, I forget the exact Dr. King quote, but that the character of a man is determined by speaking up when it's uncomfortable and never from when that man is silent and comfortable, or something to that extent. That we have to put cynicism and apathy aside. And I'm not saying I would love it. Personally, I'm so disappointed in my own situation that the soonest I could get to Ferguson is September 1st. I would be there today if the things that I have to do to keep my own life sustainable wouldn't keep me there. But the best I can do is offer social media support and try and just put it in people's faces.
Right.
But that's enough.
Right.
In today's world, that's how we're connected. We have to talk about this. We have to talk about all these issues we didn't get to because this is only a half-hour podcast. But yeah,
oh my gosh, are we almost out of time?
We're close to it. We've got about 3 minutes. So I'm going to use that as a segue to try and just hit on a lighter topic of what people actually are talking about is the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS. And we kind of joked about it earlier. Personally, I'm all for it. Anything that people do for attention. I get the clean water argument, all that stuff. But to raise money for any charity, I think it's fantastic to use social media in an innovative way. I made the joke on Twitter, like, oh man, it's so successful, I'm really scared what the testicular cancer people are going to come up with. And they tweeted me right away, and they're like, we're thinking about something with morning wood. But
well, it's interesting. The way this started out, it was a cold water challenge, and you either had to do it or give $100 to any charity of your choice. And then it kind of evolved into the ALS thing. But, the first post I was seeing on it, back in, I think, April time frame. I don't know. It was people jumping into Lake Erie when it was freezing cold. But it was to raise money for the charity of your choosing and not necessarily ALS. So I don't know how it kind of evolved into the ALS thing.
I think kudos to them for being savvy enough to just pick up on it and make it something. I mean, there's a viral marketing thing that I think a lot of nonprofits could benefit from, and maybe topics like Ferguson. Maybe there's a throw your hands up in the air, like you really do care.
Wave them like you don't care. I don't know.
Like you really do care. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
But Quincy, I can't thank you enough for helping me in my testing the waters of man, should I try out podcasting, and of course thanks to anybody who actually listened to us ramble on. But I think it was a nice conversation.
All 5 people? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But I do hope may the coming days bring peace and justice to all, and maybe a funny video of somebody like Rob Ford doing something stupid. But with that said, Cheers.